Welcome to the Gray Matters podcast, where we confront issues facing coaches and leaders in all areas. We live between the binary, and nothing is black or white. It's all shades of gray.
We're your hosts, Glenn Revel and Tim Kettenring. We look forward to sharing these conversations with you.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Gray Matters podcast. Tim and I are back again. Possibly episode 3. Could be episode 4. Depends on when we release some other stuff that we have in the vault for you guys. But we're glad you're back. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sticking with us. Appreciate you guys liking, subscribing, sharing, all the things you've been doing. If you were following Tim on social media, he posted a little video earlier this week talking kind of about false dichotomies and oversimplifying complex concepts and how that can be damaging to you as a coach, to individuals that you're in charge of, that you work with. And so we're just going to kind of take the next couple minutes just to do almost what we're calling a real-time brain dump and just let Tim extrapolate and elaborate on some of the things that he wanted to in the initial round of the video that he ended up cutting out, and then his thoughts inspired some thoughts of my own. So that's going to be what this episode is about. And obviously, if anything resonates with you or if it sparks a thought that you have, please hit us up on the socials. Let us know. Tweet us, DM us, etc. We're always available to have those kinds of conversations. So, Tim, lay it on us if you would. Get us rolling.
So this is something that I've been kind of thinking about for a while now, and I recorded a video that was way too long initially. I sent it to Glenn and I was like, hey, give me some feedback on this. He was like, well, first of all, it's like 19 minutes too long, so there's no way I would watch the whole thing.
Like, if you were my friend, I would not have watched as much of it as I did.
But he's like, look, here's the core message. There's a lot of fluff around it, which, like, if you know anything about me, I have a tendency to use too many words. And so I had to take my own advice from the video and kind of distill down what I really wanted to say into something that was more digestible. But the gist of it was, in a lot of like S&C conversations specifically, there's always like two camps, right? Whether that's like Olympic lifting and anti-Olympic lifting, or comprehensive programming that includes conditioning, or like the anti-conditioning group. And obviously, like, we could go on and on, but social media amplifies the polarization that kind of accompanies those conversations, right? Because they do start off as conversations, but then they devolve immediately because the algorithms prioritize the stuff that is incendiary and the stuff that gets people riled up. So you take people who are already kind of like emotionally charged up to begin with, because we spend most of our days around athletes who may or may not listen to us most of the time. So we've got some pent-up frustration that we tend to project on others, especially those we don't agree with. And
especially when you don't have to interact with them face to face.
Right, yeah, there's no consequences. My point was that we've got a lot of complex concepts, especially within S&C. A little bit less so like in team sports, if you're a sport coach. But we have to be able to take those complex concepts and water them down enough to make sure that if we're explaining them to a colleague who may have not been exposed to the same things that we have, or if we're, better yet, trying to explain it to an athlete, we have to simplify it enough to where it's understandable and digestible for them, but that it doesn't lose too much of the context or the definition, right? So
the word I was thinking.
And there's a differentiation between complicated and complex. And we were talking about this a little bit offline, like, complicated systems are like mechanical, they're linear. These are things like cars are complicated systems. You can generally, like, with enough information, you can take one apart and then put it back together. If you skip a step, you can backtrack, fix where you skipped, and then move forward in the same fashion. Versus like a complex system, which would be like a human cell, where it's adaptive based on different kinds of reactions within the environment, right? And that's like physiology, biology, chemistry to an extent, but really like the sciences in general are all studies of complex systems which are like adaptive. And sport, like regardless of what the sport is, those are complicated systems. Like you can usually predict what the outcome of a particular process is going to be within the sport, like whether that's like an offensive process or a defensive process or something along those lines, or like a skill development, versus something physiological where even with like a strong research base or strong evidence base, you still aren't really 100% confident that you're going to get the outcome you want based on your process. Now, even if you repeat that process a million times, the the million and first time, anyway, that next time, maybe it doesn't elicit the outcome that you want or that you expect, and then you're like, oh shit, I got to go back to the drawing board now. I don't know anything. So those two concepts, complicated versus complex, is something that we want to make like really, really clear when we talk about how simplification versus oversimplification and the processes by which each leads to like different forms of communication and different outcomes based on what our mindset is from the start.
Yeah, I like that. And it was kind of, we were talking a little bit about this idea of a lot of times in strength and conditioning, we hear this concept of simple, not easy, right? And how a lot of times those two things are confused with each other and people think they're the same, but they're not, because like a simple task, especially physically, can be a very difficult task, right? Like it's, oh, cool. All I need you to do is push this prowler down the football field and then take 30 seconds off and do that 9 more times. Oh, all right. Yeah, absolutely. It's not hard. Well, it could be hard. It's definitely not it's a simple thing to do, but it's not an easy thing to do. And it's kind of how do you figure out, which I guess like in my mind, that would be the epitome of what we would strive if we're trying to simplify things, right, and make them as streamlined and digestible as possible in a strength and conditioning setting for people to understand, especially if they have a low training age, low training knowledge. Like, man, we would love to just find things to do that are very simple that elicit excellent results. And that would be fantastic, right? But to your point about kind of the dichotomy of, if we simplify things a lot, then the next logical step is oversimplification. And then you might be eliminating important components from the training for your athletes or the people that you're working with, that you're leading. And it made me think of, there's a sports psychologist named Brian Cain, and he's written a ton of books. Most of them are called The Mental Game of Blank. Insert sport here, right? And so he has a quote from a woman, I don't remember what her name is off the top of my head, but she's the superintendent of a school district. And in this school district, the academics were lackadaisical, performing miserably, not very good. But they're all of their extracurricular activities, like sports, band, etc., were excelling. And someone asked her, like, why is this school district so good at extracurricular, like out of the classroom things, but in the classroom, like our results are subpar and nominal? And she basically said, maybe the reason why the highest performing aspect of our school districts is sports is because coaches teach sports at a higher level, and they refuse to oversimplify complicated concepts that happen within the game or within the world of music, right? And when you were speaking about that, it made me think about if we do a ton of, in the world of education, they love to use the word scaffolding for the classroom learning, like, oh, we got a scaffold so everyone can be learning at the same level, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, well, if we scaffold too much, like we're essentially just spoon feeding people information and they're not learning think critically. They're not learning to apply themselves and the idea of scaffolding is getting it to a level where people can do that to their ability level. But a lot of times when you're doing it in a big setting, it just turns into like, here's me giving you a fish instead of teaching you how to fish. Yeah. If we're using the old analogy. And so hearing you talk about the idea of like oversimplifying is really cheapening a lot of the things that, especially as a strength coach, like you've taken years of your life to learn and implement, right? Like in your training, working with other people that have gone before you. And it's almost like it's a disservice, right? It's a disservice to yourself. It's a disservice to the field, and it can even be a disservice to the individuals that you work with, because sometimes you just need to let them know, like, hey, this is to your point, right? Like, this might be a complex process, this might be a complicated process, but us learning it and learning how to do it correctly and implement it effectively, the results will be worth it. And that's kind of, as much as coaching is about simplifying things, I think there's a quote by, I don't know who it is, some famous thinker, right? But he's like, if you can't explain a complicated theory to me in terms that a 6-year-old would understand, like, then you're a charlatan, is kind of the overall quote, right? And I think that's more him speaking about, like, if you're just using terminology just to, like, toot your own horn about how many science words you know and no one understands it, you're missing the point. And especially a lot of the writing that I do now, right, where I disseminate and translate scientific information for consumption by the general population, there's some terms that you can't put into quote-unquote plain language. And they just are what they are. And people have to, like, be intelligent enough to understand these concepts, because I can't dumb them down, because then it's going to ruin everything else that we're talking about. So it's important for us to kind of find that, find that balance, find that differentiation, and also be in a space where the people around you, whether it's leadership, whether it's people that you work with, like, are willing to put in the effort to learn the thing, because we can't make it more simple, because we ruin it. And then you won't get a good outcome from it and having those conversations.
Yeah, when we were doing our cohort groups, I had a tendency to, like, use overly technical language, because I had never taken the time to understand how the people I was talking to were receiving that information. And so the feedback I got was like, hey, you sound like a dick because you're using overly technical language. And, you know, we know you're not a dick, but at the same time, like, you need to bring some of this information forward in a way that everybody can understand, not just like the 2 or 3 other people who understand these things at the same level that you do. And it's not like a hierarchy of knowledge, right? It's just like, I've been exposed to a lot of information in this one domain. You've been exposed to a lot of information in another domain. And if we only know how to communicate that information in the way that it was presented to us, especially if it's from a clinical or an educational setting, and we have to turn around and then communicate it in a practical setting. And this is something that, like, I struggled with terribly. And it's really, like, probably until maybe in the last couple months, like, I've really made a concerted effort. And part of it was, like, I sought out feedback for one thing, but then also, like, I joined a Toastmasters group, which is basically an international club.
That's some serious feedback.
Right. So it's for those unfamiliar, it's a international club that has chapters, you know, all over the world, hence international. And the whole premise is that it teaches people how to be more confident, both, like, in communication, you know, one-on-one, but then also, like, in a public speaking capacity. And there's people from all sorts of, like, literally every walk of life, every profession, all sorts of different domains. And so I can't walk in and speak grad level ex-phys with people who are, you know, restaurateurs, or, you know, maybe they own their own flooring company. Like, they don't give a shit about the Krebs cycle. Right? So, and most people probably shouldn't give a shit about the Krebs cycle, but the point remains, is like, I have to take something that's complex and water it down enough to where it doesn't lose the message, like you said, but it makes it to where the restaurateur or the flooring company owner can still understand and take away 2 or 3 main ideas from, you know, the 5 minutes or whatever that I spent in front of them.
Yeah. If you want, yeah, dude. Oh my gosh. You speaking about Toastmasters gives me the heebie-jeebies, because if you're listening to this podcast and you just want, like, a crash course in a lot of, I'm going to say, pointed feedback on how to be a good speaker, that's the way to go. But just expect to get your feelings hurt.
But they're so nice. They're so nice about it. Like,
it won't be personal at all. But you'll be like,
you'll leave with a smile on your face, and they're like, you said 58 times in 90 seconds. You should probably say less.
It's like a very refining.
Good feedback.
It's a refining experience for sure, dude. Then the Notre Dame program that I'm in right now, the ethical leadership program that I'm going through, we just had a module on executive presence. And there's three main things that are considered executive presence, and one of them is the ability to communicate. And we had a big long. This was savage, dude. It was a savage class. Like, we did a module on professional communication, and they basically let us speak on whatever we wanted to for 5 to 7 minutes. And it was the dean of the graduate, like the entire graduate program, and she just sat in the back of the room and just eviscerated us, dude, like in front of all of our classmates, to the point of like, so communication, and then like having a polished look is another thing that goes into executive presence, to the point of like, your earrings are too big, they're distracting, or your pocket silk clashes with the design on your dress shirt. Like, it was rough. I was like, oh yeah, yeah. And like, obviously being an athlete, like I've sat in some film sessions and had some harsh critiques given to me, right, about things that I could not change in the moment because I did them the day before, and now we're watching them the next morning. But dude, I was having bad secondhand anxiety for my classmates. And I got crushed for sure as well. Specifically because my style of communication is too like casual. Mm-hmm. And so that's definitely how I communicate, and I know that's my weak point. It's my weak point and my strong suit, right? And she brutalized me. Right. But yes, not to go off on my trauma bonding via getting obliterated about public speaking, but that's a great point, dude. And I love the thought when you were speaking, talking about, hey, how your expertise is like a really high clinical level of knowledge in like exercise physiology. I think a lot of times in people's professions, we just we group it like, oh, well, like Tim's a conditioning guy. I'm not a programming guy. I'm a culture guy. Like, my programming is, anyone could program the types of strength and conditioning workouts that I do, but not everyone can connect and relate to athletes like I can, right? Or in the business world, there was a company here in San Antonio that ended up seemingly going bankrupt overnight. And they were an education company, and they got a lot of government funding to specifically work with veterans who are using the GI Bill. And it went from like a startup, and the startup company was done with it, so they sold it to somebody else, and this person took it over and essentially tanked it. And it was just like overnight, doors closed, students showed up to class, and there was a piece of paper on the door that was like, this company doesn't exist anymore. And somebody finally got a hold of the CEO, and basically the CEO like did a bunch of word vomit and just said, well, I'm not a systems and processes guy, so that's where this failed. And basically everyone in the business community was like, maybe you should come up with, first of all, a better excuse as to why you tanked a business in like 3 months. And then just saying, I'm not a systems and processes guy, and leaving the conversation, like, that's not an excuse, right? So when I thought of that, I think of a lot of times in our setting, it's like, oh, well, Tim's the conditioning guy, and I'm the strength guy, so I don't need to worry about it because Tim's on my staff. And we just decide to write off, like, we totally missed this area. Like, will I ever have the knowledge of, like, Tim in exercise physiology? Probably not. But does that mean I shouldn't try at all? No. Because then we just, we preach growth mindset all the time, but then we refuse to do it ourselves. Right?
Well, it's like confirmation growth mindset, confirmation bias growth mindset.
Yes.
It's like, I like this thing, I'm gonna go really, really deep on this thing. And to the like broader point, in the Army specifically, in the review process, you've got sustains and improves. And when your commanding officer gives you feedback during that review process, whether it's for a promotion or otherwise, like, you get a list of things that you do well. Those are your sustains. We want you to keep doing those things because you're good at them. These add value to your job as a soldier. They add value to your unit's mission. They add value to whatever operation you're on. Improves, these are the things that obviously could use improvement. Some of them may support some of your sustains. Some of them, the sustains may be dependent on or continued sustainment of these things may be dependent on your ability to then improve some of your improves. And that's where like the process of seeking out, like actively seeking out feedback, like in your leadership program at Notre Dame, like getting that kind of feedback from someone who has obviously like really broad and really deep experience, both practically and theoretically, is going to be invaluable to your development as a leader.
Yeah.
Right? And your ability to, okay, now I have this feedback that, okay, maybe my communication style is a little informal, but there are situations where that informality is an immediate rapport builder. I can't lose that. That's a sustain for me. But it's also an improve because, right? So
Yeah.
because of there are other environments where I have to be more formal or I'm going to lose everyone in the audience in 30 seconds. And then nothing I say for the remaining 59 minutes and 30 seconds is going to resonate with them because I lost them because I'm too casual. So, getting that kind of feedback, but then also understanding that you don't have to necessarily lose components of who you are or your communication style. You can just continue to build on that while also shoring up other areas. And if you don't have, and this kind of goes into like the idea of like a reflective practice as well. And, most people think, when you reflect on things, you're looking backwards. Okay, well, let's just, you want to do a reflective practice on a training session, or you want to do a reflective practice on one of your stand-up gigs, right? You think that you're looking backwards to reflect on what you did and then hopefully gain some insight to where you can improve and iterate on that process, right? But in reality, it's a lot of times you can't do it internally. You have to have an external, a mirror in front of you that shows you what you did and who you are. And that's where like external feedback, people you trust who have broader and deeper experience or can just like, they just know you and they know the trajectory on which you need to travel to improve. And they can reflect that information back to you. And that's where you gain insight. It's not from looking back and like navel gazing, well, I think I lost half the group in that training session. I guess I need to do, a better job in the warm up of engaging everyone. Okay, well, yeah. But again, that's kind of like goes back to the oversimplification. That's the oversimplification of what you need to improve.
Yeah.
You actually need to do X, Y, and Z before you ever start the session. Maybe you spend, like for me, I know I struggle to bring energy to training sessions because that's not my personality. I'm not the energy guy. And may have talked about this like last week, or in our last episode. But when I got that feedback that I didn't bring enough energy to warm ups to training sessions, like I really bristled at first, and I'm like, that's not me. I don't do that.
Yeah.
That's disingenuous. That's not authentic.
But
then the more I thought about it,
stereotypical, like, got my sleeves cut off and I'm an idiot and I'm headbutting people. Yeah.
That's it. And it's like, that's not what they needed. They didn't want that either, right? They just needed me to be positive, to be emphatic about what I was doing, and to be engaged and excited about being there with them, because they feed off of that, and then it's reciprocal, right? So I had to take that feedback and adapt what I did, how I approached the session. So one thing I started doing is like, all right, if I know my group comes in at 10 a.m. at 9:35, I'm going to go sit in my office. Maybe I do 10 box breaths to kind of center myself, anchor myself a little bit. And then I'm going to put on one or two songs that I know are going to bring me or get me into a positive mindset. And then at 9:50, I'm going to walk into the room as everybody's kind of starting to come in, foam roll, warm up, whatever. And they're going to know immediately that I did something to prepare to bring energy to that session. And now I'm going to get it reflected right back to me before we ever start the actual training session. So it's a lot of it's like building those foundations based on your ability to reflect, based on your ability to seek out feedback from people you trust, and honestly, like maybe people you don't trust. Because there's value in all of that.
Yeah, that's true. I like the idea of when you talked about like bristling and not being the energy guy, and me and you both immediately went to like the stereotype that everybody sees glorified on college game day, like the let me not interject my personal feelings and thoughts, right? But then when I think of you specifically, like when I was like, oh, how would Tim bring energy? And I feel like for you, bringing energy would be probably having. I'm just gonna like because we've never worked with each other, but I would just feel like you would probably have like small intentional interactions with people as you were moving throughout the space or throughout the room, right? Whether it's like, and you talked about this last time, like, hey, just greeting everyone in the office, or you know what I mean? When it's with your athletes, it's like catching them as they walk in the door, or handing them a piece of equipment and just checking in with them. And they know you as a person. They're like, ah, Tim is like a little more reflective. He's a little more introspective. He might be a little more introverted. And I think even you talked about I've been thinking about this a lot. People's pregame process in a professional setting of like, what do people do, or what can we do when you're about to walk into a meeting and you know you have to give a presentation, right? Or you're about to like taking whatever we did, and we are at an advantage because we experience this as athletes, and figuring out what your pregame routine is for whatever it is that you do and you have to perform now, and making it so like you could do yours anywhere because you sit down, you do your box breathing, and you listen to some songs, and you could do that in a cubicle, and no one would think anything of it,
Right.
right? Which is
Funny,
perfect.
funny story with that. So, whenever I like when I was in a team setting, I had kind of like a couple of pregame playlists that I would kind of work through as I was getting everything set up for pregame and stuff like that. And then I had a similar playlist for when I would have a speaking engagement. And I have a couple of in-person clients, kind of like long-term rehabs that are they're dentists, and they have this professional study group that meets once a month. And as I've kind of been working with them and talking to them about kind of the challenges that dental professionals face from a musculoskeletal standpoint and kind of the overuse issues that they have, which is they're wild, and there's actually a lot of data on it. They said, hey, we want you to come present to our study group at a country club. So I said, hey, awesome. That's great. Like, I'm all for it. And so as I'm, driving to the country club to give this little presentation to this group, I'm listening to my hip hop, and I'm like, I don't know that this is gonna have the effect that I need it to have.
You're gonna roll in there amped up, dude.
I'm just gonna bring energy, and which is obviously ironic given the previous context of the conversation, but like, it was just, it felt a little bit, a little bit misaligned. But at the same time, like, I had a little bit of a buffer to kind of like, okay, I've got some confidence, which is really like, that's why I personally like do stuff like that. But I've also had some time to like let my sympathetic nervous system come down a little bit. So I'm both really focused, calm, and confident, which was ideal, right?
Yeah.
Like I was able to speak with like authoritatively on what I was talking about, and I didn't talk too fast because I wasn't still amped up. And overall, like, it went really well, but it was funny because my pregame routine for one area of my professional life didn't necessarily carry over particularly well to this other area of my professional life. So
that's good that you have that self-awareness and kind of I very much went through that as well. I actually, when I was playing arena football, I used to blog, and I wrote a blog about like what a pregame routine looks like, right? And as I was doing it, I kind of reflected on my like evolutionary journey as an athlete, because like in high school and college, right, it was just like the most aggressive, angry music you could think of, because like I want to go rip someone's head off. And then maybe as I matured as a person or as an athlete, or as the game got more complicated and I needed to be way more cognitive in what I did, right, like I was way more calm. Like I was listening to like ethereal, like I was listening to Enya and like trying to be by myself. And of course, like, the locker room environment is what it is, right? So everybody's doing their own thing. Sometimes they let you play music, and if they did, it was like aggressive and loud. And that was just not what made me play good, because I got too excited and I couldn't focus. Dude, I have this very specific memory of playing flag football, like just as like an adult, like just a fun recreational league. We had a woman on our team that was like very competitive, always high strung, and she was like never that effective on the football field because she was so anxious. And one day she showed up to the game after she had gone to happy hour, and it was like the best she'd ever played. I was like, oh my God, this is the best football game you've ever played. What did you do before this? And she's like, well, I went to happy hour and had 3 margaritas. So I'm like a little buzzed. And I was like, okay, well,
Perfect.
yeah, I was like, it was the perfect example of like her excitement level was finally appropriate because she had had enough alcohol, right? Which is like a depressant to make her
Yep.
anxiety level drop low enough that she could now perform. So please don't take this as a like recommendation of the Gray Matters podcast to crush a couple White Claws before you go play your like professionally affiliated or collegiately affiliated like sports game. But if you're playing rec league flag football, maybe give it a try. You know what I mean? Maybe give it a try
Or if you're
or
playing
whatever.
pickleball, aka wiffle tennis,
Yeah, right. There's an
smash a few because it really doesn't matter.
Oh, that's so funny, dude. I love that. I also love how you noticed you were in the zone when you were speaking. One of my friends just did a big professional, like he spoke at a large nationwide conference for an operating system, and I asked him how it went, and he goes, "It was good. Without sounding cocky, I crushed it." He's like, I've been getting a lot of people coming up to me with how inspiring I was, and it was like revealing and empowering to him. And I was like, cool, dude. When you find yourself in that space, like you can very much become like almost when you're like lucidly dreaming, right? And you're like,
Yep.
oh, you can do the same thing when you're performing at a high level. Like you can know you're in the zone and absolutely crushing, and that's totally
Yep.
fine. And you can just keep it rolling. So that's cool. I
Flow
like that
state.
you have that. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. That's the technical term for it. But I like that you have that awareness and that you having people outside of yourself that are subject matter experts in what you do, or even just like have nothing, they don't know anything about what you do, but they can generally tell if you're confident in yourself, can like speak that to you, and now you have enough
Yep.
self awareness to realize what's going on. That's cool.
Yep.
That's always good to have in
Didn't
people like
always have that in place.
people to have that in your life. So, okay, I like that. What do you think? We're almost done, but I like the idea of you just said, I didn't always have that in my life. So, how did you get it? Did you actively seek it out? Did it come, some of it just come about organically? What did that process look like for you? So people can
So
maybe mimic it if they're having a realization after hearing us talk.
so um, after undergrad, instead of going to grad school, I spent let's see, about 10 years at the School of Hard Knocks, which is like if you're an alumni of the School of Hard Knocks, that's like 9.5 years too long. Um, but like
You got
um,
PhD, baby.
I I ignored a lot of feedback
Mm.
for a long time because I had been told certain things growing up and as an athlete and even early in my coaching career, and I was just super arrogant. And so I wasn't receptive to feedback, like classic peak Dunning-Kruger, like
Uh,
way up at the top,
okay,
right?
nice.
And so after some like brutal failures, I was I don't remember who I was talking to. A mentor at some point in my life was like, you have to be more open to feedback. Like, you have to be. And not only that, it's like, you have to seek it out. Not everybody is going to understand what you need from a feedback standpoint. Not everybody is going to understand how to give it to you. But you have to take agency for yourself and try to find people to give you feedback. Tell them how you need feedback given. Tell them what you want to improve on, and let them guide you in that process. And so that's, I mean, even it doesn't have to be formal, right?
Mm,
It
yeah.
can be, you know, in a couple of weeks, like when you present, if I'm there, I'll be taking notes, and I'll say, hey, like, just give me a heads up, like, what things do you think are going to be sustains for you? What things do you think are going to be improves? And I'll make a couple of notes in each category, and then we can debrief after,
Mm,
and you can get that reflection, right? And then you can take that information and say, hey, you know what? Some of these improves, I think you're full of shit, so I'm gonna ignore them. But a couple of them are good, so I'm gonna see what I can do to make them useful.
That it's like what we talked about last time, where it's called feedback, not feed facts, and you have to determine what
Yeah.
you want to implement and what you don't. To
Yep.
your own.
And then you turn it into feed forward.
Ooh, nice. I like that. That was cool. Okay, that was good. Perfect. Well, yes. All right. I like where this conversation went. It's definitely not where it started, but that's okay because it was a good little like wandering, real time brain dump, which was cool. So I like that you brought up the idea of if you're self-evaluating or you're having someone evaluate you, something to sustain and some things, sustainments and improvements are like two really easy categories if you need something, some way to get started, right? And then also figuring out what your pregame routine is and making sure it's applicable to the situation that you're going to walk into.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Yeah,
definitely
100%.
it's definitely a process, right? Like you're going to have to do some trial and error. So that's something to incorporate into. This is what my pregame process was. Here's how my performance review went, and maybe I need to adjust that.
Short anecdote on that note. I spent a year at this like very exclusive, very small, like bougie high school. And I would at the previous high school I would listen to kind of like a similar kind of like rap and hip hop pregame playlist. And I remember like walking out onto the field and I was listening to like Boosie. And I remember looking around and it's like these parents, it's like a cocktail party.
Oh yes,
And I'm getting ready to go yell at their
I
kids,
dude.
drop a bunch of F bombs. And like, I remember my head coach who I had worked with at the other school, which was a much different environment. You know, he was like, you may want to tone it down a little bit.
Yeah, that's what
Good
we
feedback.
call situational awareness
Yeah.
and being a malleable professional.
Yep. So
Oh my
speaking
god,
of
I love that story, dude.
knowing your environment.
Yes, absolutely. That's cool. That self awareness is key. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Gray Matters podcast. Find us on Spotify, subscribe, share with your friends if you think it's worthwhile. And we will talk to you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.
Also, we'll be on Apple Podcasts within a week.
We're on the come up, baby. Find us in 2 places.
There you go. We fired our production assistant. We hired a new one.
This new one is going to be way better, too. So,
Yeah. So much better. All right, guys. Appreciate you joining us. See you in a couple weeks.
This episode of the Gray Matters podcast is brought to you in part by Revelation Facilitation, building teams based on values and purpose. Visit us online at revelationfacilitation.com.
It's also brought to you by Maverick Human Performance, where we empower coaches to build adaptable systems to navigate the complexities of athletic development. Find out more at maverickhumanperformance.com.